Okay, so it's a little hard to see, but this is an homage to one of my heroes, Leonard E. Read. He's the author of iPencil and the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, which to my knowledge was the first liberal think tank. Well, maybe think tank's not the best word, but the first organization designed to teach people about liberty, the Foundation for Economic Education. And he would often, as I understand from what I've read, start his seminars by darkening the room, and he had at the front an electric candle. And he would slowly turn up the candle until there was just this bright candle in the room. And he would say, "No amount of darkness in the world can extinguish this light. No amount of darkness in the world can extinguish this light." And I just think that's so inspiring and beautiful, that if we have just some light of knowledge, some light of good, some light of beauty, the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. And light can be increased. So if there's a darkness and there's just one light in the room, what happens? It does light up the room. And what do people do? Do they flee from the light? This glow? Probably people come towards the light. So if you are recognizing and exuding that light, people will, naturally be inclined to move towards it. And the wonderful thing about light is it can be shared, like a candle. You can light your candle from others, and then that light can spread. But you don't have to be afraid that darkness can extinguish the light. Okay. So we're going to start with a note of gratitude. In the spirit of Leonard Read, he in his essay iPencil, he quoted G.K. Chesterton as saying, "We are perishing not for want of wonders, but for want of wonder." Well, it's the reverse. But we are not perishing because there's nothing to wonder about, but because we are not doing the work of wondering. Okay? So we're going to do that. We're going to wonder so that we don't ignore what's there. And again? All right. So I'd like you to turn, let's just turn to a neighbor, and we're going to just brainstorm for 5 minutes. But I'd like you to think, if you have any paper or pen or a note on your iPhone, I want you to actually think very concretely, not just, "Oh, the world's lovely," or "the world's terrible," but be very concrete. What is it that is great about the world today that was not great about the world 250 years ago? Maybe there's just one thing. Maybe everything's terrible. But whatever that one thing is, let's identify it and let's celebrate it. Maybe there are more and more and more things, and we just haven't thought about them. So turn to your neighbor, even if it's someone you haven't met. You can be in groups of 3 as well. But make sure you identify concrete things. What is great today that was not great 250 years ago? And we have 5 minutes, which is not a lot of time, I promise. Great. Let's what's great today that was not great 250 years ago?
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, telecommunication.
Telecom. Isn't that freaking cool? All right. What else?
The accessibility of knowledge.
Accessibility of knowledge. That's wonderful.
Going off the other day, the inequality is decreasing as well as poverty.
Yeah, poverty is decreasing. Wonderful.
I think the paperclip is one of the biggest inventions.
I love it. I love paper clips, and there are more of them now than there ever have been before. Wonderful.
Market economics.
You're saying market economics. There's more market economics.
Difficult to get it. Bad in internet and difficult accessibility.
The internet. Wonderful. Could you pass the mic on?
Instant communication to anywhere in the world and very cheap.
Instant and, to all intents and purposes, cheap communication to anyone in the world. I just have to say, I lived in a different country from my mother, and I just was so grateful to be able to use Skype to see my mother and have her see me, and that was just a wonderful gift.
Electricity.
Electricity. Which is cool in its own right, as well as all the wonderful things it does for us.
Spare time.
Spare time. We are not working from dawn to dusk just to eke by an existence. We have spare time to come to Bali. How wonderful. Yeah.
Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek.
They were here. That's awesome. Yeah. And let's not make light of that. If we had not had certain developments, they may have died in childhood. So we have had a reduction of child mortality, and because of that, we've had wonderful people like you, and like Milton Friedman and like Hayek.
Steve Jobs, iPhone, and Tim Cook.
Awesome.
Understanding of nature.
Okay, we have a better understanding of nature, the progress of science.
Selfish is the greater virtue now.
There have been expounding of philosophies that say selfishness is a virtue. Is that what you're saying? Like Rand. Wonderful.
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning. Yeah.
Even kings did not enjoy that.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So let's go very quickly now. Quick.
More than 75 people free now.
Paper free?
75% people free now.
Paper free.
People free now.
Oh, they're free. There's more free people. Awesome.
Free flow of information or Facebook.
Facebook. We're awesome.
Medicine is a lot better than it was
Medicine.
250 years ago.
Yeah.
We can read Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations.
Awesome. Is there anything that someone would like to say that's radically different from what's been said already? Yes.
Fashion.
What's that? Fashion.
I could not see people wearing those clumsy clothes.
Cool. So you're just saying like clothes are way better now, 250 years later, more fashionable. Would you pass the mic back too? Anything else? Yeah. Can you just speak up, Sarita?
More peaceful times, no war.
Okay. We have less violent death per capita now than we ever have had before in history. And if people don't know the facts about that, there's a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which is really wonderful. Yes.
We have more longevity and more people.
We are living longer and there are more people. How wonderful.
And Wikipedia.
More people live in a free society. More people enjoy individual liberty.
Excellent. So there's more freedom. All right. So it's my thesis, although I'm not going to prove it. I'll suggest it, that all of these things are the fruits of liberty. In some sense, all of these things are the fruits of liberty. What about, let's just hear any objections to that? I mean, it's a bad group for this because everyone's like, yeah, liberty is the source of all things, or at least a necessary condition. But can you think of anything that anyone has said that you might object to saying, no, that's not really because of liberty. You're just a hack. You just think everything's to do with liberty because you're a libertarian. Any objections? Anyone say, no, it's not because of liberty that we have this, it's because of something else?
Yeah, electricity, you just wanted to make electricity. I don't think the guy was thinking about liberty.
The guy didn't think liberty, I'm just making electricity. Faraday wasn't interested in liberty necessarily, he just thought that electricity was wonderful. And for his own purposes, he explored those and wanted to share that with people. So what do you think? How would you answer this? Is liberty in part responsible for Faraday and Maxwell and doing their work? And what's more, how about their work being made into light and light bulbs and those kinds of things? Edison, and not just Edison, but all the people who had to coordinate to get him the glass and the metal.
It's about market economics, about the nature of market economics.
If we had not had markets, would their knowledge have been useful to us? Or would we have been able to enjoy it? Would we know about Faraday? I don't know. I don't know if we'd be educated if we weren't wealthy from markets or if we didn't have the internet. But more than that, the scientific revolution came about at a similar time that there was a growing of the Enlightenment and a growing of the idea of a sphere of individual liberty. And it's a little bit trite, but there are many examples of this. Of Galileo, he said, I think this is scientifically true, and I'm going to tell you, Pope, that you're an idiot. And they said, you must retract that and go to prison. But thankfully, there was freedom of the press. And other people wrote books about it and spread those ideas. If there wasn't freedom of the press, and later if there wasn't more and more freedom to think and to share ideas and to expound those ideas and to speak to other people, then the insights of people like Galileo would never have spread the way they did. So even the very science, not just the marketization into useful commodities, but the very science is a consequence of a change towards liberty that occurred in the recent centuries. So, the talk on the schedule is a little bit of a misnomer because it's not so much a history of liberty that I want to discuss as rather just to give some perspective on liberty and maybe look at the seeds of this idea. So, for me, the idea of liberalism, there's lots of liberalisms. There's the classical liberalism, there's the minarchist libertarianism, there's the anarcho-capitalism, there's all kinds of different things. There's also kind of modern left liberalism, but I also count that as liberalism, but perhaps not very consistent. I would say it has kind of three characteristics, and these three characteristics have been more consistently and more widely practiced and understood in the last 250, 300 years than they ever have been before. The first is the idea of contract versus status, or status. It used to be that when you were born, you had to do what your parents did. If you were lucky enough, if you were the eldest born, if your father was a blacksmith, you were a blacksmith. It's where we got the last names, right? Your name came down to you from your parents because of their profession, right? At least in English and Germanic languages. If you were born later, perhaps you could go into the priesthood, but there were very few things you could do, and there was not competition. If you were a serf, you were owned, in a sense, by the land and by whoever happened to be in charge of the manor. Okay? If you wanted to run away, you would be brought back and whipped. And perhaps it wasn't quite an equal exchange, but in some way the knight was also duty-bound to do certain things for his serfs, and the lord for his serfs. But we've moved more and more to the idea that our relationships should be based on consent and agreement and contract, and that we should be allowed to withhold our consent and deal with new people, not the people that we happen to be born into relationships with, but that in some sense we're in charge of our own lives and can relate to people by contract, by consent rather than status. And another side of this same coin is the presumption of liberty. The presumption of liberty. It is presumed now, pretty wonderfully, that we should be free to do whatever we wish unless someone else has a good reason against it. I don't think we're practicing it, but I think that's an idea in the culture. It used to be that we were tied by the laws, and that everything we did was pretty much defined by law and by very rigid custom. But we have a lot more of a presumption of liberty. And the last achievement, these I think are all achievements of liberalism, is the idea of limiting arbitrary power of man over man, or person over person, the rule of law. None of these is in perfect fruition, but all of them, I think, together define loosely the idea of liberalism. If you have any very pressing questions, if I'm not clear about something, please let me know. So rather than a full history of liberalism, I don't know how much time I have left, maybe 20 minutes? 20 minutes, great, 23 minutes. I just want to give an idea of the seed that led to the fruits. So I argued earlier that all the things, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find something that you think is great today that wasn't great 250 years ago, that is not a consequence of the fruit, is not a fruit of liberty. And I want to talk about what the seeds of that fruit, what is the seed of that tree of liberty? So I'm taking off a little bit after Tom Palmer's story. I don't know if people were here for Tom Palmer. He was talking about the Spanish scholastics, and he mentioned that the scholastics influenced the levelers, Locke and others. I'm going to talk about another group that were basically contemporaries of the levelers, called the English dissenters. And the English dissenters came out of the religious turmoil and struggle and differentiation of the Reformation. So we had pretty much in the Western world a monopoly religion, Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, And there was a breakaway from Luther, Calvin, and others. And they started disagreeing about what the true doctrine was. And then they started killing each other. If you were a Protestant and someone else was a Catholic, it was thought your duty to lock that person up, perhaps behead them, take away their property. It's your duty, and also if you're on the winning side of the battle, it's pretty good for you too. You get to take their stuff. And so you had kings and princes fighting to establish their religion as the true religion. And there were two consequences of this. One was that people got really sick and tired of the uncertainty and the fear that they might be killed and their goods might be taken away. Because what was difficult about the Reformation is that there wasn't a clear winner. It kept going back and forth, especially in England. So you'd have a Protestant king, and then you'd have someone who threatened to be a Catholic, and then perhaps a Catholic queen, Catholic king, who knows. So people would be dying, and at some point people said, you know, if we okay, we're in charge right now. If we kill the people who are under us, they might get in charge next time, and they'll kill us. So let's establish a principle that maybe we should tolerate one another, just out of self-preservation. The principle, I don't want someone to harm me, so I've got to elevate the principle as a moral kind of absolute of politics, that because I don't want it to redound to me, and also because of charity, the golden rule, I ought not allow that to happen to others. And hopefully when they get in power, they won't do it to me. But I think even more important than that was a reassessment of the nature of religion, the good and the true. And those are the dissenters. The dissenters were Protestants, but who didn't follow the Church of England. But they were still told by the church, you have to do this and that and the other according to the precepts of the Church of England. And those people said, we disagree with the Church of England, but they did something else. They said, the Church of England is stealing from us a God-given right to make decisions and understand the world. And it's actually our freedom of conscience and of choice that is given to us so that we can be pious and moral. And because we want everyone to be pious and moral, everyone should have the freedom of choice and of conscience. Not because the choices that they make will be moral or good or correct, but because freedom of conscience and of choice is a necessary condition of being moral and of being good. So one of the first dissenters, kind of a hero, he migrated to America. His name was Roger Williams. He was a founder of Rhode Island. And this quote, it's probably the best quote. I'm going to show you a couple more. It's wonderful because it's so pithy and so short. He says, forced worship stinks in God's nostrils. So what is his conception of God? His conception of God is an all-knowing being. Now let's say this lady in the front here is not a believer, but I say, if you don't go to church, I'll take your things, beat you, throw you in prison, perhaps decapitate you. I'm bringing her into the place of worship, and she may say things out loud and do things externally, and the rest of us might say, oh, how lovely, how pious she is. But God knows inside she's resentful. She doesn't believe, she doesn't agree. Right? So he knows. So that worship, like an incense, is going up and it's stinking. All right? So God doesn't want fakeness, according to Roger Williams. He wants true understanding and true worship based on conscience. So these ideas moved over to Locke. We had Neil talking about Locke the other day, so you inspired me to put a couple of quotes in here. Locke said it would be unwise to entrust our salvation to other people through the civil power, because he said all the life and power of true religion consists in the inward and full persuasion of the mind, and faith is not faith without believing. And yet the practice of forcing people into religion, far from being a furtherance of true religion, is indeed a great obstacle to our salvation, because the power of the state is external, it is outward. There's also one other quote that, if I understand from, so if you can see here, it says, the power consists only of the state, only an outward force, but true and saving religion consists in the inward persuasion of the mind. So, this I think this is the seed. I think the seed has been sown in different cultures and by different philosophers, but the seed of modern liberalism comes out of the Spanish scholastics and the English dissenters, influenced by them, from this principle that each human being has a spiritual importance. Now, whatever you understand that spiritual nature to be, or that divinity to be, there's something about each person that makes them unique. Each person has an inward life, a life of understanding, of mind, of belief, and of conscience. And the famous phrase that was used and understood is that conscience cannot be compelled. Conscience cannot be compelled. You can force someone outwardly, but you cannot change their inward parts. And by inward, I don't mean the organs. I mean what's inward of the mind. So I think the seed of liberalism is the idea that it's really important that people have their own thoughts and that they develop themselves. Just a quick example of this. I'm an educator. It's very possible to train children like monkeys or like computers to sing the alphabet or to say 2 + 2 is 4. I don't know if you've ever seen a child say 2 + 2 is 4, 2 and 2 is 4. If you ask many of those children to give you 2 objects, could you give me 2 of those pencils? They very often can't do it. If you say, I have these 2 and I have these 2, how many do I have when I put them together? They often don't know. So would we like a world in which people walk around, they say 2 + 2 is 4, not killing others is good. And they had all these things that they said outwardly, but they didn't truly understand them or feel them in their hearts. Would that be a good world? So that's the essence of liberalism. We each have a conscience, a spiritual purpose to actualize ourselves, to search for and understand what is good, what is right, and what is true. And because conscience can't be compelled, we have to deal with one another through persuasion, argument, reason, example, through beauty. So we have to be exemplars and persuaders, and not coercers, because the highest purpose of life can't be achieved through coercion. What's more, these dissenters, and what I understand from Tom Palmer is this came from the scholastics, is that if we take this young lady and we put her in church and make her say that she believes something she doesn't, we add unto her a number of other sins also of hypocrisy and contempt of divine majesty. So if she says she believes something she doesn't, whatever her other sins of disbelief are, by forcing her into a church and saying she believes, we are making her a greater sinner. And if our purpose is her salvation, we better not add sins to the pile. And that's just a beautiful argument for people. You see, this is an argument within the assumptions, but that's a beautiful, beautiful argument that was persuasive to many. Along with the idea that freedom of conscience is necessary for moral living, or is a necessary condition for morality, we also started to learn from similar roots that freedom of thought and of discussion is also important for learning and discovery. For learning and discovery. One of the, by the way, if you're interested in the former essay, which you should, it's one of the very, very important essays of liberty. It's called A Letter Concerning Toleration by John Locke. The other, and if you have a reading group, or if you don't read much, this is one of the essays you've got to read. You've got to read with others. It's called On the Liberty of Thought and Discussion. And in there, John Stuart Mill says, if all mankind minus one were of one opinion, and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had all the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. what is it about a majority or a supermajority or all of humanity except one that justifies them in silencing him that isn't reciprocal? If he had the power to silence them, why would he be unjustified? And what is it that the majority has other than power in that circumstance? He goes on to say, were an opinion a personal possession of no value except to the owner, if to be obstructed in the enjoyment of it were simply a private injury, it would make some difference whether the injury was inflicted only on the few or on the many. So what he's saying here is that if an understanding or an opinion were only personal, perhaps it would be a greater injustice to rob the many of the enjoyment of their minds and opinions than the few. But he says this is not the case. The peculiar evil of silencing the expression of opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity as well as the existing generation. So he's saying it's not just a matter of private enjoyment. Each person's conscience is not only a right of their own enjoyment, but that it's really important to the entire race, not only to the current generation, but to all the generations that will come next. And that's a lot of people. So what is his argument here? He says, 1, for if the opinion is right, to silence someone is depriving others of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. Maybe the majority is wrong, and maybe the minority is right. If you silence that right person, then a voice for the right has been removed from the world, and the majority will stay in ignorance and in error. Okay, well that's pretty clear. We don't want people in ignorance and in error, so in the cases where the person is right, okay, we shouldn't suppress them. And perhaps it's difficult to know when they're right. So maybe we shouldn't oppress them. But if it's wrong, and I hear this in the news all the time, their opinion, if it's wrong, we can silence it because he's going to corrupt the majority. He's going to corrupt the people. But in the second place, John Stuart Mill says, if the opinion is wrong, people lose what is almost a greater benefit. It's more important that we allow people who are wrong to speak their mind, because they lose the clearer perception and livelier impression of the truth produced by its collision with error. Do you think we would understand the world as well as we do if we had not had Marx to elicit Mises? Would we have the insights of Mises if we didn't have Marx? And why is it that we have this lively and truer perception of the truth? It's because we were forced by the marketplace of ideas to articulate the truth and understand it better. Milton Friedman is wonderful on this. He from Mill, advises us to go out and spend time with people who disagree with us, to read the people who disagree with us, spend time with the people who disagree with us, because if you're always with people who agree with you, you say something that's not very good and they say, yes, wonderful, and you get a warm fuzzy feeling, oh, I understand, I'm wonderful, and you go to bed at night and you haven't improved one iota. You go to someone who disagrees with you and you say, I think this, and they say, that's a terrible idea because of this fact, this reason, and you say, oh my goodness, I'm disquieted. Oh, I feel it in my inward parts. That's the quote. If you want to have an Andrew Humphries quote, talk about the inward parts. Okay, so it's really important that we meet with people who disagree with us, find out what reasons do they have that seem persuasive to us that we had not taken into account before. And maybe it's not that we're totally wrong, but we perhaps are wrong in part, and we have to reform what we think in part. Or perhaps it's a matter of having a cleaner conception, or just being more persuasive. Right? We have a more persuasive understanding of these ideas. So I highly, highly recommend this essay on the liberty and thought and discussion by John Stuart Mill. So from this seed comes the idea of freedoms of conscience. First of all, freedom of religion, which is a little bit different than tolerance. It's actually, we started to have a secularization of the state, a separation of religion and state. And the idea was that the state, because of its nature, was incapable of advancing true religion and morality. Now, this wasn't a libertine philosophy that there is no right, everything is relative, and we might as well just let anyone do whatever they want. Rather, it is that there is a good, that there is a right, and that it's each of our jobs to figure out what it is and to live by it. And that the most propitious circumstances for that to happen is a marketplace of experimentation, where everyone who has an idea argues about it, and where there's freedom to exercise our understanding of it. These kind of came around the same time. The very first liberals were arguing about this idea of freedom of speech and of the press, and of freedom of religion and practice of religion. But what was interesting about the dissenters is they thought a lot about this idea of freedom of conscience, and they said, well, why is going to church or not on Sunday rather than Saturday more a question of conscience than the clothes you wear? Who is to say that the Quakers' dress, and if you've seen Quakers, or at least older Quakers, had a way of dressing, who's to say that that is a matter of conscience, and that your ability to wear this purple, pink, blue, and white dress is not a matter of conscience? Because if the conscience is inward, no one else can judge. Only the individual can judge. So they started saying, in fact, clothing is a matter of conscience. Education is a matter of conscience. The English dissenters tended to be people who thought that the state should not be in charge of education. Why? Because, well, that's a matter of conscience. And that people, their parents and themselves, have that responsibility, a God-given or nature-given responsibility. It used to be that people's dress would determine their station in life. So this relates to contract versus status. It used to be that you could only wear certain feathers in your hat if you're of a certain class, or wear a sword if you were of a certain class. You'd have to kneel down, etc. So if you enjoy wearing what you wear, that's a consequence of freedom of conscience, I think, at least in part. Okay? Academic freedom. Freedom in universities for science and other things. The second idea, rule of law. I'm just going to list them because we don't have time to go into them. But I think the second great achievement, the rule of law, is this idea of presumption of innocence, habeas corpus. You can't be imprisoned without going before a judge and having a time set of a trial. No secret or retroactive laws. I'm going to read them. You can read them too. An independent judiciary, warrants for searches and seizures, pretty much an end of torture, proportionality of punishments to crime, and predictability of taxation. I think what's important to understand from the rule of law, I'll just make 2 points about it, is that liberals in general, I think this is what we're striving for as liberals, is the transformation of law from a weapon of oppression of those who are powerful, might, into a shield that protects individual rights. So the idea that we should only use force to protect the sphere of conscience and of action. And the other is predictability of coercion. Even when it's unjust, it's better that it be predictable than unpredictable. And the rule of law says you are only bound by rules that are announced and understood beforehand, not retroactively or secretly. And although the rule of law is not equivalent to liberty, it's an essential element of liberty. And Hayek makes a good point that if you know what your taxes are going to be, that's better than not knowing what your taxes will be. So enterprise can flourish when you can calculate that 10% of your income will go to the state, rather than not knowing whether or not the state's going to ride in horses, burn your house, fight you with a sword, hack your children to death, and then take everything you have on Saturday, and you don't know when it's going to happen, right? So enterprise can flourish in this environment. Lastly, of the three, freedom of association and of contract. From these we get freedom of trade, careers open to talent, you don't have to do what you were born into, a rejection for a time and a reduction of state-granted monopolies, a cosmopolitan attitude towards foreigners, end of military conscription, and freedom to innovate. It's hard to fathom, but it used to be that many people thought the highest form of life was going around and killing others. But that was the best thing to do. You were most noble and most virtuous if you were brave enough to go find other people with swords or who at least were weaker than you, and you could kill them. Okay? Well, it turns out, thanks to liberalism, most people no longer think that's the best way, and we have a more cosmopolitan and peaceful attitude. From this, we get the abolition of slavery, civil rights, more equality for women, more equality for gay people, eroding of caste around the world. So all of these things that are great today that were not great 250 years ago are the results, in part, of conscious liberal movements. And secondly, all of these achievements unleashed the creative, peaceful human energies accidentally that led to the market economy and to prosperity. We didn't really know that prosperity was a fruit of liberty. It was from justice and from right that the early liberals fought for liberty. And it turns out that we live in a world so constituted that when we are just, we become prosperous. Okay, which is really very, very wonderful. Okay, so in conclusion, it's our job to find those dark spots and to be the light in those dark spots. Find where these principles have not been brought to their conclusion, where there's still inconsistency, and to light those spots. But to not lack perspective that we live in a world today that is largely defined by liberalism. We live in a largely and mostly liberal world, and a world that is becoming more liberal all the time. So we should celebrate and be grateful for that, and find the remaining dark places and be the light. Thank you.